So I was randomly in my kitchen, like thinking about this, because Mortal Kombat 11 is out, and I haven't got the game yet. I have to beat Mortal Kombat 10 first, and I feel like I should probably beat that game first before I play 11, even though I am very excited to play 11. I love Mortal Kombat 10 and Mortal Kombat 9, which came before, which was just called Mortal Kombat. But I wanted to do a video talking about like early Mortal Kombat memories, like when I was a kid. Because for those of you who don't know, I am in my mid 30s. I'm 35, and I grew up a huge Mortal Kombat guy, but a lot of folks got introduced to Mortal Kombat with the PlayStation ones, like Mortal Kombat 4, Deadly Alliance, like all those, and other people who were younger than me just started playing Mortal Kombat with the Mortal Kombat 9 that came out on Xbox and PS3. But I remember, I have so many great memories of Mortal Kombat. Like I remember, when I was a kid, back in the early 90s, the arcade games that were like the hottest ones for fighting was Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 was like the biggest game. I think I've done a video about Street Fighter memories, or maybe a podcast, I don't remember. But I love Street Fighter 2, and we were obsessed with Street Fighter 2. Me and my friends were in first grade, second grade, third grade. Well, mostly second grade, third grade, fourth grade. We loved Mortal Kombat. I'm sorry, Street Fighter, and when it came out on Super NES, we all went out to get it, and it was just a big deal because even though it's not a perfect arcade port, it's a really good arcade port. Very smooth, great gameplay. Love playing that game on SNES. So Mortal Kombat, I remember I'm in my room, and my best friend at the time comes into the room, and he's like, dude, there's a game I played. You're not even going to believe it. It's better than Street Fighter. And I was like a kid. Now, again, we were all kids. I was like 7, I think, 8. I don't remember how old I was. I was a kid. And I remember I was like, better than Street Fighter. And it was just funny because I had played a couple of other fighting games in the arcades. Like I played Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury, which are SNK games. Not really ones that are as anywhere close to being as big as Street Fighter was in this country. But so I was kind of used to that kind of style of fighting game, and these guys, no, these are like, they're real actors, and like in the game, you can like fight people, and you can rip their heads off and rip out their hearts. I was like, stop, you're like, I didn't believe that. No, you can rip out people's hearts. I'm like, what? Like in Indiana Jones? Because that was the first thing I said, because at Temple of Doom, you can rip out somebody's heart. Obviously talking about Kano here and his fatality. Yeah. They had these things called fatalities, and when you beat a guy, you can kill him after. I'm like, what? Like, this is crazy, dude. We're kids, and we're like, this is nuts. And I used to live across the street or next door to this Indian store. It was like run by Indians. And when I say Indian, I mean like people from India, not Native Americans. And these Indians, convenience store Indian people, had arcade games there. And I remember they had like Superman side-scrolling game. They had Final Fight there, Street Fighter 2. Then they had Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Art of Fighting. And then they had Mortal Kombat. And I remember going over there and playing Mortal Kombat. And I remember just being like, what is this? Like, what is this? And I played the game, and I didn't think it was as fun as Street Fighter. And I still don't think the combat in the first Mortal Kombat game is that great. It's really not that great. I don't think that Mortal Kombat as a series really understood how good the combat was as far as like the actual game combat until really Mortal Kombat 9. Even though Mortal Kombat 2 had great way like one of some of the best improvements ever for a game. I feel like Mortal Kombat 2 might be one of the best sequels ever, like to any game, because they really improved on everything. It's like the right sequel, more characters, more fatalities, But this is not about Mortal Kombat 2. So I played Mortal Kombat 1. I picked Liu Kang because Liu Kang looks like Bruce Lee, screams like Bruce Lee. He's pretty much a Bruce Lee clone. And I found it interesting that so many fighting games of the time had these like Bruce Lee clones in them. Like Street Fighter 2 had, a little bit after Mortal Kombat, had released a new version called Super Street Fighter 2, and Fei Long was in the game. And Fei Long was pretty much like Bruce Lee, even though his face didn't really look as Asian as Bruce Lee. Obviously, he looked more like an American guy. He looked like kind of a hybrid of like Bruce Lee and like Van Damme. Like he had kind of Van Damme's face, but he had Bruce Lee's kicks, and he had like the dragon punch with a kick, which was awesome. But Tekken years later had, of course, Law, and Law is their Bruce Lee. I mean, it's obvious. You can't even sit there and say it's not. With this game, Liu Kang was, and I love Liu Kang. I love Liu Kang. Didn't know any of the moves or anything. I just remember playing the game, and I remember I'm fighting in the game, and I remember I saw the reptile tease, which is, what they would do in the game is they would have reptile appear, and he would like show up and like raise his hand. It would say "Look to La Luna" or something. Like it would actually to give you a clue on how to fight him. Reptile was like the first truly secret boss I can remember in a fighting game. Even though he really wasn't, because if I remember correctly, in Art of Fighting, I think the final boss is also a secret. I don't remember. I think it was Mr. Big or something like that. It's been so many years. But, no, I was like, what is this? And at the time, during this whole era, the early 90s, Power Rangers was also taking off shortly after that. And I remember seeing Reptile as this like green ninja, because I saw Sub-Zero and Scorpion. And that was one thing too that my friend told me about Scorpion. He's like, no, they have this guy who's this yellow ninja, and he throws a hook at you, and he says, get over here. I was like, what? Like, dude, I'm losing my mind right now, as a kid. So I go in there and I see like he throws a hook, get over here, and all the blood comes out. And I'm like, dude, like, I don't think y'all understand. Like, when back in those days, ultra violent stuff was not easy to see. Like, we had movies and things like that. I've talked about it in my reviews. Steven Seagal films, Chuck Norris, that stuff is fine. But in video games, we never really saw that. There was a very small number of games that really had that kind of violence. And even Street Fighter, which was again, a classic game, had blood, a little bit of blood, not too much. And, obviously really strong attacks. But this was the first game where we had disembowelments. And then there's the pit. So you go to the pit level, uppercut the dude, boom. And you go into the pit, and you see all these dead bodies in the pit. And I'm just a kid, and I'm like, yo, like, this is the craziest game I ever played in my life. I had never seen anything like that before. Then I got to the end where you fight Goro. And I plunked some quarters, and I ain't gonna lie, I wasn't that good. I was a kid. It was my first time playing. And I was like, yo, like, this dude has 4 arms. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, obviously when they made this game, they used realistic people. I didn't even know at the time they actually had real models do a very early version of motion capture. One thing I will tell everybody is that even though Mortal Kombat 1 does not have the best combat of any fighting game, in fact, it's kind of choppy as hell, it still had some of the most breathtaking visual effects for its time. Like, it was a pioneer, because motion capture was not really a thing back then. This is like early 90s. This is before, Planet of the Apes and MCU and Star Wars and all these, Lord of the Rings that had motion capture. This is like way back. And, Johnny Cage, Liu Kang, these were real people playing those characters, and I saw Goro, and I'm like, that can't be a human being. So I had to, in my head, figure out how they were able to create this very realistic looking character that had 4 arms. And it's weird because that first Mortal Kombat game looks oddly more realistic than any of the other ones. Like, I feel like Mortal Kombat 2 and 3 got a little bit too much on the cartoony side, whereas Mortal Kombat 1 looks really realistic. Like, I don't know, it's the way they shot it, or maybe it's very, kind of rustic, kind of, low budget, but it just looked more real. And then, of course, after that, you fight Shang Tsung, which I never got to him in the arcade. I had to buy the home version. Now, I remember being so hyped. We were obsessed with Mortal Kombat. I mean, all the magazines were too. I was a big fan of EGM and GamePro magazine, and I remember the magazines would always talk about Mortal Kombat. It was it was the biggest thing. It was the biggest thing. And I remember the Mortal Kombat 2 hype began, and it was like, whoa. And I remember people were talking even back then about, let's do Street Fighter versus Mortal Kombat, which we actually never got to this day. We got Capcom versus Marvel, SNK, freaking Capcom versus G-Force even. We never got Capcom, I guess Street Fighter versus Mortal Kombat. And it wouldn't really work because the game mechanics are so different. Then again, Tekken X Street Fighter worked, so they could probably make it work. So I remember later on in the year, in September, was Mortal Monday. Now, for those who don't know, this was a big deal. The magazines promoted the home release of Mortal Kombat for 4 game systems. It was Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Gear, and Game Boy. Now, I knew the Game Gear and Game Boy versions were going to be kind of bootleg, because they had like 6 characters instead of the usual 7, or sometimes even less than that. The fatalities weren't really there. It was just, they were different. It was a very different kind of choppy game. Not really a good portable port, but that's how most of those games were back then. Super Nintendo was the way to go for me. So then I found out the truth. So what happened was they had this commercial, and you can look it up on YouTube, called Mortal Monday. And it was the first time I remember ever hearing the Mortal Kombat, like the song. And I remember they had a bunch of like kids on the streets and grown-ups like running with like leather jackets, like, and they kept showing clips of the game. They were like, Mortal Monday is coming. Like, this is the game, the day that you can go buy Mortal Kombat. And I told my dad to go out, let's go get Mortal Kombat. So we went out and we bought Mortal Kombat Super Nintendo, and there's no blood. And if you're a kid back then, you feel me on this one. There was no blood. We found out soon after from the magazines and from kids at school that no, the Sega Genesis version had the blood. You had to put in a blood code, ABBACABB or something like that. It's been so many years. Also the dollar code, down, up, left, right, A, right, down. I can't believe I remember that, dude. So, anyways. So what happened was, so it came out. I was very let down that Mortal Kombat was, censored. And there was a game Genie code where you can convert the sweat to blood, but it just wasn't the same. And yet it sucks because the Super Nintendo version was so smooth. The gameplay was really, really good. Very tight, very good controls. Super NES was a great system. But for those who don't know, this was the era where Nintendo was very, 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 very much into censorship. They were very much doing the no blood thing. So you had games like, Mortal Kombat and Doom that had no blood. What the hell, Nintendo? And we were all like just freaking out back then. So I had a Sega, and I bought Mortal Kombat on Sega. And it was like, dude, all right, we got the fatalities. This is the way it's supposed to be. But man, the gameplay was not great. It was very choppy, not very responsive. The controls were really bad on that Sega version. But it had the blood, and I was happy. Then they released the Sega CD version of Mortal Kombat, which I did go out and buy later on, way later, because I said, okay, this is the definitive version of Mortal Kombat. It's got the blood. It's got everything I want. And it also has like that Mortal Monday commercial as a cutscene in the game. Like they put it in the game. And it's like, okay, this is better. This is more like the arcade version. But then you play as Shang Tsung, and whenever he would morph, or you play against Shang Tsung, the final boss, and whenever he would morph into one of the other people, it would say loading, ... loading. Because back in those days, the CD drives in these game systems were so slow, and they didn't have enough onboard RAM. If you're a kid back then, you know what I'm talking about. If you're a kid now, you probably have no clue what I'm talking about. But whenever you played a game that on CD, whether it be Sega CD, 3DO, PlayStation 1, you always had those damn load times. Nowadays, you still have load times, but they're not as bad. Nowhere close to being as bad. Back then, it was, oh boy, it was crazy. And I was like, damn, so I'm fighting the final boss, and the freaking dude just is so, he's just so like hard to play because the game kept freezing, and I'm like, what the hell? And it took years for me to actually get a good emulator and a good ROM for the arcade Mortal Kombat, and I was able to play that again years later. But if you're a kid back in the day, you kind of remember this. And I might actually come back and do a video about Mortal Kombat 2, because I have a lot of fond memories of that game as well. But Mortal Kombat 1, I don't even know why I'm even making this video, dude. I just feel like rambling sometimes about these things. So, again, not the best game. I actually felt its fighting-wise, it's actually not a very good fighting game at all. Like, it's just not, it's too, the combos are just kind of cheap. It's not like an Arc System Works game where they're all, like, really complex, or even like a Smash Bros. It's a very simple game, but they did get better as the years went by. Way, way better. They did combos better. They did moves better. Sorry about that noise there. I moved a cable over. And it did improve, but man, the fatalities, the ultra violence, like John Tobias and Ed Boon were really pioneers of their craft, and that's the way I feel. So anyways, thanks for listening, and let me know your Mortal Kombat memories. If you're my age or older, or maybe a little bit younger, if you remember Mortal Kombat when it first came out, let me know, because it was the biggest thing, dude. God, that took the game world by storm, man. Thanks again. Talk to y'all soon.